A man poured hot coffee on a teenage black girl mid-flight. But that's not where this story begins. It starts with a quiet seat by the window, a worn-out hoodie, and a girl who refused to shrink. What kind of rage burns in someone so deeply that they'd attack a child for existing? What happens when that child turns out to be the daughter of the airline's CEO sitting just rows away? And what if her silence wasn't weakness, but the calm before a reckoning? This is not just a story about race. It's a story about power, visibility, and the cost of speaking truth when the world would rather look away. And in 12 unforgettable chapters, you'll witness a journey through humiliation, confrontation, courage, and the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need applause to echo. So ask yourself, what would you have done on that plane? And when silence speaks louder than words, will you listen? If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more voices, more truths, and more stories that deserve to be heard. Now, buckle up. This flight is about to take off. The airport buzzed in its usual low-frequency chaos, families saying rushed goodbyes, solo travelers with noise-canceling headphones, flight announcements rolling over one another like ocean waves. Amid the orchestrated disarray stood 17-year-old Amara Duvall, clutching a dog-eared paperback in one hand and a boarding pass in the other. She had always liked airports, not because of the travel, though she enjoyed that too, but because they offered a strange kind of anonymity. Here, everyone was heading somewhere. Everyone had a story, but no one cared enough to ask yours. And Amara liked that. She liked the way no one looked at her too long. No one noticed the quiet confidence in the way she moved, or the weariness she sometimes carried in her shoulders. She glanced up at the screen, Flight 6113 to Atlanta. On time, gate C29. Her fingers tightened slightly around her backpack strap. Today was big. Not because of where she was going, but because of how she was going. Alone. For the first time. Her father, Calvin Duvall, CEO of Pacific Skies Airlines, had originally planned to fly with her. But a boardroom crisis had popped up less than 24 hours before takeoff. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she had half expected it. She had told him it was okay, that she could do this by herself. And she meant it, but part of her had still hoped. Hoped for one more seat-side pep talk. One more reassuring hand on her shoulder as the jet lifted into sky. Instead, she stood here solo, checking her gate like 1,000 other travelers, looking like any other teenager. Except she wasn't just any other teenager. And this wasn't just any other trip. She was headed to the National Youth Leadership Forum in Atlanta, an invitation-only summit for top students in public policy, social justice, and community engagement. A weekend of roundtable discussions, peer networking, and media interviews. Amara had submitted her essay on restorative justice with hesitation and had nearly fainted when she received her acceptance letter weeks later. And now, here she was. Book in hand, hair in a soft crown braid, gray hoodie zipped halfway over her simple t-shirt. No jewelry, no designer luggage, just a determined calm she had inherited from both of her parents. She glanced at the photo tucked into the corner of her book. It was old, a little bent at the corners. Her mother, Lena, in her courtroom suit, standing on courthouse steps, eyes full of fire. A civil rights attorney who had fought like hell until cancer won a war she never should have had to fight. Amara's breath caught slightly. She pressed the photo back into the book, tucked it deep into her hoodie pocket. A voice called out, slicing through the crowd, Pacific Skies Flight 6113 to Atlanta is now boarding Group 1. Her pulse quickened. She checked her seat assignment again. Row 18A, window, premium economy. She liked windows. She liked watching the world grow small. Sometimes, when everything in her life felt overwhelming, she imagined herself from that height, tiny, still whole, still moving forward. Amara adjusted her backpack and walked toward the gate. The agent scanned her boarding pass without looking up. "Have a nice flight," he muttered. "You too," she replied reflexively. She stepped onto the jet bridge, where the airport's noise faded into the hush of engineered air. Each step brought her closer to something she couldn't quite name. A beginning, maybe a test. Her mind flickered briefly to her dad. He had promised to catch a flight later that evening. She knew he'd try, but CEOs often missed birthdays, recitals, and even college visits. It was never intentional. It was just the price of the position. But Amara didn't resent him for it. He had worked his way up from a gate agent at Denver International to the head of one of the country's largest airlines, not through nepotism, not through connections, but through sheer, stubborn will. Every time someone told him no, he learned how to make it a not yet. She admired that, and now she was trying to follow in his footsteps, in her own way, on her own path. She stepped through the plane door. "Welcome aboard," a flight attendant said warmly. Amara smiled. "Thanks." She made her way down the narrow aisle, scanning the row numbers. Her seat 18A was still empty. She slipped into it, settled her bag under the seat in front of her, and buckled in. Then she leaned against the window, letting her gaze wander across the tarmac. Outside, baggage handlers moved with practiced choreography. A small child pressed their face against the gate window, giggling. A ground crew member waved to the cockpit. For a moment, Amara felt the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, the kind you only notice when it's suddenly gone. She pulled out her book and opened it to a bookmarked chapter on nonviolent resistance. The irony would become evident later. But for now, she read in quiet focus, legs crossed, hand resting against the cool sidewall of the aircraft. The seat beside her remained empty. The flight would be full. She knew that much. But maybe, just maybe, the seat would stay vacant. She let herself imagine a flight of silence and soft clouds. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, that seat would be occupied by a man who believed people like her didn't belong there, and that her quiet resolve would soon be tested against the roaring weight of prejudice. But for now, she turned another page, unaware, still believing, like most people do, that cruelty is something you hear about, not something that boards beside you. The cabin filled gradually, like a tide creeping in, row by row, suitcase by suitcase. Amara kept her eyes on her book, but her ears picked up everything. A toddler crying 2 rows back. The sharp click of a businesswoman's heels. The low hum of overhead vents blending with human chatter like background music no one had written. She didn't look up when people passed by her row. She didn't need to. She could sense them. The way they moved. The sense they carried cologne, airport sandwiches, shampoo, stale coffee. She flipped the page. Outside the window, gray clouds hung low over Seattle. The rain had paused, but the wetness lingered on the tarmac, painting reflections of orange vests and blinking lights. She watched a luggage cart bump gently into a waiting trailer, the driver barely noticing. A small smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. People always rushed toward the sky, but it was the ground she liked to study. A soft thud beside her broke her focus. She looked up. A young couple was arguing softly while trying to settle their baby. A man in a navy blazer squeezed into the middle seat, one row ahead. Another passenger accidentally dropped his phone, muttered something about needing coffee, then laughed nervously when the flight attendant offered to help. Amara returned her gaze to her page, a quote from John Lewis. "Never be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble. Necessary trouble." She let the words sit in her chest for a moment. Good trouble. Her mother used to say that too. Not loudly, not as a slogan, but in the quietest moments. When Amara came home from school hurt by a classmate's comment, when she felt invisible in spaces that claimed to be inclusive, when she questioned whether speaking up was worth the isolation. "Good trouble," her mother would say gently. "Not everyone can cause it, but you can." She'd always meant it as permission. Amara traced the underline she'd made beneath the quote, then closed the book softly. She looked out the window again, searching the horizon for meaning. The clouds had thickened. Her reflection stared back at her tired eyes, full lips, her mother's cheekbones, her father's quiet poise. She noticed the seat beside her was still empty. Maybe no one would come. Maybe she would have this whole row to herself. She almost let herself hope. A chime rang out overhead, signaling the final boarding call. Passengers were still trickling in, slower now. The stragglers. The flight attendants moved with slightly faster steps, helping older travelers find space in full bins. The tension of imminent takeoff clung to the air. She saw a teenage boy wave goodbye to his mother from row 22, both pressing their hands to the glass, separated by a thin pane in the unspoken distance of growing up. She inhaled. She liked these final minutes. They always felt like the hush before a concert. Amara leaned her head against the window. Cool, solid, familiar. The seat beside her remained empty. Until it didn't. A rustle of fabric. A scent she didn't recognize, too sharp. Like cheap aftershave. Then a man's voice. "This is 18B. Right." She looked up slowly. A man stood beside her, mid-50s, tall but slouched like the years had pressed down on his spine. His polo shirt was tucked into khakis with too many creases. His hair was thinning but neatly parted. His face was tight with the kind of tension that came from needing to be somewhere else, or thinking you deserved somewhere better. "Yes," she said, voice even. He didn't smile, just nodded briskly. She unbuckled and stood so he could slide in. He moved quickly, brushing her shoulder with his elbow as he dropped into the seat. "No excuse me. No thanks." She sat back down quietly and fastened her belt again. He adjusted his tray table unnecessarily, then his watch, then his seatbelt, even though the light was still off. She opened her book again. A pause passed between them like an invisible curtain. She hoped he would respect the silence, but silence, she was learning, was never guaranteed. "You traveling for business?" he asked, not looking at her. She glanced at him. "No. School." "You seem young. A leadership summit," she said simply. He raised an eyebrow. "Summit. Huh. For what, cheerleading?" She turned to him fully now. "Public policy and youth activism?" He blinked, then gave a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Figures?" She tilted her head, eyes calm. "Figures. You know, these days everyone's an activist," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Even kids. Seems like all you need is a sad story and a hashtag." She looked at him steadily. Her silence was louder than any reply. He shrugged, as if her refusal to engage confirmed his point. She returned to her book. The pages didn't feel the same anymore. The words blurred at the edges. His presence radiated something, not just annoyance, but something darker, something that pressed against her ribs without touching her, something that made her want to shrink. She wouldn't. Instead, she focused harder on the print. Outside, the rain had returned, soft and insistent. "You on some scholarship or something?" he asked a few minutes later. Still not looking at her, his tone casual, but loaded. "I paid for my ticket," she said evenly. He murmured. That sound, that single syllable, it said everything he hadn't dared put into words. Everything about how he saw her. Not as a fellow passenger, not as a student, but as someone out of place. She felt her fingers curl tightly around the edge of her book. The man leaned his head back, eyes closed. Within seconds, he began tapping his foot restlessly against the floor. Rapid, annoying, purposeful. Amara closed her eyes, just for a moment, willing the next few hours to pass without further incident. But somewhere inside her, something shifted. Something small, but unyielding. A realization. This was not just about him. This was about the space she occupied, and the way people like him made girls like her feel like they needed permission to exist in that space. She opened her eyes and looked down at her mother's photo again. Not everyone can cause good trouble, but you can. The plane had leveled out, steady now at cruising altitude. The clouds outside had thickened, a soft blanket of gray spreading out like a second sky. Amara stared into them, trying to lose herself in the motionless drift of it all. Beside her, Douglas Whitner shifted in his seat for the 4th time in 5 minutes. He had flipped through a copy of Business Traveler without actually reading it, muttered about the legroom, and pressed the call button once to ask if the flight had free Wi-Fi, and again to complain about the cabin temperature. The flight attendant had remained kind. Her badge read, Camille. She had answered each question with patience, her smile never quite fading, but Amara noticed the subtle tension in her hands when she walked away. Whitner sighed loudly, tapping his fingers on the armrest. "You people fly way too much these days," he said, glancing sideways. Amara turned to him slowly. "Excuse me," he chuckled, as if she should find it funny. "You know, flying everywhere, taking up these seats, always in a rush to be important." Her mouth parted slightly. She closed it again. She had heard this before. Not the words, but the weight behind them. The implication, the coded insult. She said nothing, but her stillness shifted. Her back a little straighter, her fingers still on her book, but not turning the page. He kept talking. "Back when I was your age," he said, "I worked 3 jobs just to afford a one-way flight to see my father before he passed. Now, they hand out tickets like coupons." Amara's voice was quiet, but unwavering. "Who's they?" Whitner blinked, then smirked. "You know who I mean." "No, I don't." He studied her now, fully, like a man deciding whether to press the button again. She turned to the window, ending the moment, or so she thought. He scoffed under his breath. Unbelievable. She didn't look back at him. She refused to give him that satisfaction. But she heard him, and something inside her, a string pulled too tight, began to fray. She breathed slowly. 1 breath, 2, 3. The flight attendant passed again with the drink cart. Camille offered a small smile. "Coffee, sir, yes. Black, strong. And for you, Miss Just Water." "Thanks." Camille handed her the cup, offered a silent nod, and moved down the aisle. Whitner took a long sip of his coffee, as though punctuating their silence with his presence. Amara wished the seatbelt light would come on, wished there'd be a reason for the flight attendant to return. wished her father had flown with her, wished her mother could sit across from her, eyes full of resolve. She tried again to return to her book, but the words didn't cooperate. She couldn't focus on paragraphs when every cell in her body was hyper-aware of the man beside her. His shifting weight, his glances, his foot tapping again now, in rhythm with his judgment. She looked up, her eyes scanning the rest of the cabin. Everyone else seemed at peace, or maybe just unaware. She wanted to believe it would end here, that he had made his point, whatever it was, and would now retreat into the comfort of his superiority. But people like him rarely stopped at passive disdain. He leaned closer, just slightly. "So, your parents buy you this seat?" Her jaw tensed. "No?" "Oh." He sipped his coffee again. "So what, then?" "Some diversity program." She turned to him, slowly. "I'm here because I earned it, because I was invited, because I belong here." A pause. He chuckled, low and bitter. "Sure, sure. Everyone belongs now. That's a new rule, isn't it?" She didn't blink. The new rule is dignity, respect, and not assuming someone's worth because of your own bias. His smirk faded. Bias. She held his gaze. "I've read your tone since the moment you sat down. I've heard every loaded question, every backhanded comment. You don't want a conversation. You want confirmation that you're still more important than someone like me." The smirk returned, but it didn't last. It never does when someone refuses to play their part. He leaned back again, crossing his arms, staring ahead. "Don't get all preachy with me, sweetheart. You kids think you invented oppression." Amara didn't flinch. Oppression doesn't need inventing, just surviving. He snorted, shaking his head. "They really trained you." "Huh." She ignored him. She stared out the window again, wishing the clouds could absorb her frustration. But even the sky couldn't hide what was building. He shifted suddenly. "You know, I paid full price for this seat." "So did I." "Right." His voice grew sharper. "Not like that matters anymore. It's not about merit. It's about narrative. If you look a certain way, talk a certain way, act like a victim long enough, everyone hands you a seat near the front." She froze. She didn't want to give him her anger, but her blood was warm now. Her hands tingled. She turned to him one last time. "My mother died fighting for equality in courtrooms you probably never set foot in. My father built himself up from the ground crew to the top of this airline. I didn't inherit privilege. I inherited purpose." His eyes narrowed. Before he could speak again, the plane hit a small patch of turbulence. The seatbelt light came on. Camille returned. Checking the trays were up and passengers secured. "Everything all right here?" she asked, eyes flicking between them. Amara nodded. "Yes. Thank you." Whitner muttered something under his breath. Camille's brow furrowed slightly. But she moved on. Whitner shifted in his seat. Then, without warning, he took the last sip of his coffee, looked at Amara out of the corner of his eye, and smiled. A smile that never reached his eyes. A smile that said more than any insult. And then he spoke. "Enjoy the rest of your flight." His tone was syrupy, insincere, and it was the last thing he said before everything changed. The cabin fell into that soft lull that only happens after meal service. When trays have been collected, cabin lights are dimmed, and most passengers finally surrender to the rhythm of flight. Some dozed with their heads against windows. Others watched silent films on back-of-seat screens. Overhead, the reading lights created tiny halos of artificial warmth. Amara sat still. Not asleep, not relaxed, just still. She stared out at the clouds again, though they looked different now, heavier, unfriendly. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers entwined tightly. Her book remained closed, spine up, its pages now stuck together from a faint splash of Whitner's coffee earlier. He hadn't said another word since that last smile, but she could feel him. That was the thing about men like him. They didn't have to talk to be loud. Their silence took up space. It pressed against you, dared you to react, dared you to flinch. Amara wasn't going to flinch, but her mind was a different story. It whispered thoughts she hated. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe I made too much of his comments. Maybe it's better to just endure. No. She knew those thoughts weren't hers. They were survival instincts, handed down from women like her mother, women who had smiled through poison and carried on, who had chosen the long game instead of the explosion. Amara was not ashamed of that lineage, but right now, she wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and shout, "Why do I have to be the one absorbing your hate just to keep this cabin peaceful?" Instead, she breathed, slow, deep, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Her father taught her that. When her mom died, and the world lost color for months, he taught her how to find her breath again, even when it felt like grief would crush her lungs. You can hold your power quietly, he told her once, like a coiled spring. Doesn't mean it's not there. She held on to that now. Another ripple of turbulence shook the plane gently. The seatbelt sign remained lit. The flight attendant, Camille, passed by again, checking rows. She offered a smile when she reached them. Amara nodded. "Everything okay here?" Amara opened her mouth, paused. "Yes, thank you." Camille hesitated for half a second, then nodded again. She moved on. Amara hated the words the moment they left her mouth. She wasn't okay, and she knew Camille could see it, but saying it out loud felt like pouring oil on an open flame. The man beside her hadn't done anything dramatic yet. Not by airline standards, not by legal standards, only by the quiet, insidious ones. He turned to her then, just slightly. His lips didn't move, but his eyes said enough. They scanned her face, then drifted down to her lap. Her hoodie, the photo of her mother poking slightly from her pocket, then back up. He looked away. It felt like a slap. The flight was only halfway through. Amara wanted to crawl out of her own skin. Across the aisle, an elderly woman gently adjusted her oxygen tube and fell asleep. A few rows ahead, a teenager laughed at something on his phone, oblivious. The normalcy of it all was surreal. It made her feel invisible in the worst way. How can everything look so normal when you're being slowly unmade from the inside? Her heart beat faster now, not from fear, but fury. Fury at the fact that she was spending this flight managing him, managing his stares, his silences, his weight, his air. She turned slightly toward the aisle. Her neck ached from holding tension for too long. She watched Camille at the front of the cabin, scribbling something on a clipboard. Another flight attendant spoke into the phone quietly, then nodded. Whitner shifted again. "You going to Atlanta for a protest?" Amara froze. His voice came out of nowhere, soft and sharp. Or is this one of those conferences where everyone pretends to fix the world? She didn't answer. He leaned in slightly. "I've seen people like you on TV, angry, dramatic, always looking for cameras. This your moment?" She turned, finally, slowly, and looked him in the eyes. "I'm 17. He blinked. I'm 17 years old, she repeated. I'm flying to a conference that I earned my way into. I paid for my seat. I didn't ask for attention. I didn't ask for your approval. And I sure as hell didn't ask for your commentary. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to, because every word landed with a precision that silenced everything around them. Whitner opened his mouth, then closed it. He turned his face toward the seat in front of him. Good, she thought. Let that sit. She turned back to the window. The clouds had started to part now, faint lines of gold slicing through the gray. Light, even up here, found a way through. Then she felt it. The shift. The tray table moved. A sudden, deliberate motion. The air smelled different. Burnt. Bitter. She looked down. Her lap was wet. Dark liquid spread across her jeans, soaking the fabric. Her book, now reopened on her leg, absorbed the rest. The heat stung for a moment, lukewarm enough not to scald, but hot enough to be intentional. Amara gasped. The sound escaped her throat before she could stop it. Passengers nearby turned. Camille appeared again, rushing over. What happened, Amara couldn't speak at first. Her breath caught. Her chest heaved once. Then again. He poured his coffee on me. Her voice was raw. The words hung in the air, shocking in their simplicity. Whitner shrugged. She moved. My hand slipped. I didn't move, Amara whispered. Camille's eyes widened. Sir, you need to step away from this seat, he scoffed. It's just coffee. Camille leaned toward her intercom and pressed a button. I need the purser. Now. Possible passenger assault in row 18. Amara sat motionless, coffee soaking her clothes, her book ruined, her breath shallow. She saw movement in the aisle, heads turning, eyes finding her, mouths beginning to whisper. Someone across the aisle pulled out a phone. Started filming. A new silence fell over the cabin, the kind that says nothing will be the same. Not for her, not for him, not for anyone watching. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, bitter and heavy, clinging to the fabric of Amara's jeans and the destroyed pages of her book. The cabin had gone still, not silent. There was still the gentle hum of engines, the rustle of clothing, a cough from the back, but something deeper had shifted. The energy, the air. It felt brittle now, like glass. Amara stared down at her lap, breath shallow, hands frozen above the soaked mess. Her hoodie had taken most of it, but a slow trickle was now spreading across her thighs. Her mother's photo, once tucked neatly into her pocket, was damp and curling at the edges. She looked at it, then looked away. Camille was back almost instantly, kneeling beside her, voice low but urgent. Sweetheart, are you okay? Amara couldn't answer right away. The word okay felt like a lie. It sat in her throat like a stone. He poured it on me. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, but there was no mistaking it, no misinterpreting it. Camille's eyes flared. Her head turned sharply toward Whitner, who remained seated, arms folded. She moved her leg. He muttered. I went to set the cup down and look. It spilled. I didn't move, Amara said. Her voice was clearer now. I didn't even twitch. I watched it happen. The voice came from across the aisle. It was a young woman, early 20s, dark hair, glasses pushed up on her forehead. She'd been quiet the whole flight, earbuds in, reading a travel guide. But now, her phone was in her hand, camera app open, and she was standing. He leaned toward her and tipped it. She didn't flinch. She didn't bump him. He did it on purpose. Several heads turned now. A man 2 rows ahead twisted in his seat. A middle-aged couple behind them stopped whispering. The cabin's attention, once scattered across movies and naps and half-finished novels, now funneled into row 18. Camille's voice dropped lower. "Sir, I need you to come with me to the back of the aircraft." "Oh, come on," he said, laughing like it was absurd. It was coffee, a little mistake. She's turning it into a drama. "I'm not asking, sir. This is now a safety concern. You'll need to comply, or the captain will be informed." His face changed then. He looked around, saw the eyes, saw the phone recording, saw the moment start to crack around him. "Fine," he snapped. "I'll move, but this is ridiculous." He stood, brushing past Amara again, and for the first time since he boarded, he looked uncertain, not apologetic, but uncertain. As he followed Camille down the aisle, Amara noticed something that nearly broke her. He didn't look back at her. Not once. He didn't see her. Not even as a person. He only saw the inconvenience, the disruption to his comfort. Camille turned to the woman across the aisle as she passed. "Thank you for stepping in." "What's your name, Harper?" the woman replied. "Harper Nguyen?" "Thank you. Harper, please hold on to that footage. Someone will likely need it when we land." She nodded, still recording. A different flight attendant appeared at Amara's side now. A tall man with salt and pepper hair, calm demeanor. He offered her a fresh blanket and a large plastic bag. "If you want to change, we can find a space, or move you to an empty seat further up." Amara nodded slowly, voice hoarse. "I think I'd like to clean up first." "Of course. Take your time." She stood carefully, legs trembling, only slightly. As she stepped into the aisle, passengers murmured quietly, not in disapproval, in support. Several gave her small nods. One older woman offered a tissue. Someone else whispered, "I saw the whole thing. You're not alone." She walked to the lavatory, closed the door, and let the soundproof hum surround her. Inside the tiny space, she peeled off her hoodie and stared at the stain across the front. The coffee had soaked through. Her t-shirt underneath was damp too, clinging to her skin. She took a shaky breath, then another, and suddenly the tears came, not loud, not angry, just slow, hot, and full. She wasn't crying because of the coffee. She was crying because of everything it represented. Because that man hadn't just spilled a drink. He had tried to diminish her, to put her back in a place he thought she belonged, to remind her, in his own cruel way, that no amount of achievement or poise or preparation could protect her from the hatred some people carried like currency. And worse, he had done it like it meant nothing, like it was casual. She wiped her face, forced herself to breathe again. Her reflection stared back in the mirror-wet eyes, flushed cheeks, strong jaw set in defiance. "You're not broken," she told herself. "You're still you." She pulled on the spare Pacific Sky sweatshirt Camille had left outside the door. It was a little too big, but soft, comforting. She bundled her wet clothes into the plastic bag and stepped out. Harper was waiting near her row. "I just wanted to say," she began, "if you need anything evidence, a statement, I'll back you up." Amara looked at her. Really looked. Harper's eyes were steady. "Kind. Thank you. That means a lot." "I've seen this kind of thing before," Harper added. "My dad went through it more times than I can count. I hate that it happened to you, but I'm glad people saw it this time." Amara nodded. She wasn't ready to speak more. Not yet. She returned to her new seat, this time closer to the front, a window seat again. The coffee smell was gone. The man was gone, but the memory of it sat beside her like a ghost. She pressed her forehead to the glass. Outside, the clouds were breaking open, just slightly. The sun was beginning to shine through. She watched the light stretch across the sky, golden and slow. Somewhere behind her, in the rear galley, a quiet conversation was happening between a flight attendant and someone very important. A man who had boarded the plane quietly, unnoticed. A man who had upgraded at the last minute after clearing a surprise meeting in Seattle. A man who was now being told that his daughter had just been attacked and that she hadn't even known he was on the plane. The air inside the plane had changed. What had once been routine, an ordinary cross-country flight filled with reading lights, beverage carts, and casual yawns now carried the unmistakable weight of something more. Not panic, not chaos, but a slow-moving wave of reckoning. Passengers were no longer scrolling mindlessly through movies or flipping pages in silence. They were whispering, leaning in close to one another, watching the space Amara had vacated, watching the flight attendants move with an urgency that said, "This isn't normal," watching each other, wondering where this was going. No one said her name, but her name was in every glance. Amara sat quietly in her new seat, a few rows ahead now, away from Douglas Whitner, away from the scent of coffee and the ruined book, away from the moment that had splintered the flight. But not truly away. She still felt it, the residue of it, the burn in her chest. Even after the warmth of the coffee had faded, her palms were cold now. She gripped the armrest gently, focusing on the slow rise and fall of her breath. Behind her, the whispers swirled. "Did you see what he did? She didn't even move. I swear, she was just sitting there. That guy. They moved him to the back. What's going to happen? Someone said her dad's on board. Someone important." Harper returned to her seat but kept her phone close. She wasn't filming now, just holding the device like it was armor. She glanced at Amara once, offered a small nod that said, "I'm still here." Amara nodded back. She didn't need words right now. She needed stillness, but she also needed to know she wasn't alone. The seat beside her remained empty. The row was mostly quiet, save for the occasional cough or seatbelt adjustment. But up ahead, in first class, the energy was building too. Calvin Duvall sat in 2A, a glass of water untouched on the tray beside him. He'd only meant to surprise his daughter. He had been running late, booked on standby after his morning meeting ended early. He hadn't expected to get a seat. When one opened in first class, he'd taken it without hesitation. He planned to find her after landing. Maybe surprise her at baggage claim with a guess who made it after all. But when Camille approached first class, eyes serious, voice low, and said, "Mr. Duvall, we have a situation. I believe it involves your daughter." The surprise turned into something else entirely. He stood immediately. "Where is she?" "Row 21 now. She's moved up. She's shaken, but okay." But the passenger next to her, he spilled coffee on her, intentionally. After a series of troubling remarks, Calvin's jaw clenched. His fingers pressed into his palm before he released them slowly. Did he hurt her physically? No, not in the way you're asking. But emotionally, he tried to. Camille hesitated. "You may want to speak with her. And with him." Calvin stood straighter. "Where is the man?" "We've moved him to the galley in the back. The cabin crew is watching him." Calvin nodded once. "I'll start with my daughter." The walk down the aisle was longer than it should have been. Passengers recognized him. Some turned their heads, startled. A few whispered his name. Others just moved their legs aside to let him pass. But everyone noticed the energy surrounding him, the power of a man who knew how to command a boardroom, but now walked like a father, not a CEO. His stride was steady, but his eyes held fire. When Amara saw him, she blinked twice, unsure if he was real. "Dad?" Her voice cracked slightly. He dropped to the aisle beside her row in one swift motion. "Hey, baby girl, are you okay?" She tried to speak, but the lump in her throat returned. He took her hand, held it like she was still 5 years old, scared after her first scraped knee. "I'm here now," he whispered. Her tears came then, not from pain, but from the sudden safety of him, the presence, the familiarity, the knowledge that she didn't have to carry this alone anymore. She leaned into him briefly, forehead against his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't you dare be." He pulled back gently, looked her in the eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong." She nodded slowly. He took a deep breath, composed himself, and looked at Camille, who had waited nearby. "Let's go see the man." "Yes, sir." Passengers watched them walk down the aisle. They saw the moment father and daughter passed each other the girl who had been humiliated, and the man now holding that humiliation in his hands like a live wire. As they disappeared into the back, some passengers murmured again, "That's her dad. I think he's the CEO." "You serious? That guy messed with the wrong person." Good. Good. In the rear galley, Douglas Whitner was seated on a jump seat, arms crossed, jaw set like concrete. He looked up as Calvin entered, and for a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then realization. Then panic. "You're her father." Calvin didn't answer right away. He let the silence hang there, like judgment. Douglas shifted uncomfortably. "Look, it was an accident. I said that already." She moved. It spilled. Calvin's voice was calm. "We both know that's not what happened." Douglas tried to smile. "You're going to take her side, obviously. She's your kid." "I'm going to take the truth side," Calvin said, his voice low, steady, the tone he used in mergers and courtroom depositions. "We have witnesses. We have footage. You didn't just spill a drink. You delivered a message, and now you're going to receive one." Douglas blinked, unsure if he should be scared or amused. "You can't do anything to me." "Actually," Calvin said, "I can." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Douglas could hear. "I'm the CEO of this airline. That means I decide who flies with us. I decide who we protect in the skies. You won't be flying with Pacific Skies again. Not now. Not ever." Douglas's jaw dropped. "You're banning me. You can't do that. That's done." Calvin's voice didn't waver. "And when we land, airport security will be meeting this aircraft. You'll speak with law enforcement. Not me. Not her. Them. This is insane. This is accountability." Douglas stood indignant, but Camille placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Please stay seated, sir." Calvin turned away, walking back toward the front. He didn't need to hear anything else. He'd said enough. The rest would be handled by justice, or, at the very least, by consequence. Calvin returned to the forward cabin with a pace that was measured, but no less charged. Passengers watched him pass again, but this time there was something different in their gaze. It wasn't just curiosity now. It was recognition. Whispers floated from row to row like small gusts of wind. nudging the cabin into full awareness. "That's the CEO. Pacific Skies. He's her dad. I think I saw him in a magazine once." Someone even pulled up a Google image on their phone to confirm what everyone had just guessed. Meanwhile, Amara sat by the window, her hands now dry, her sweatshirt wrinkled from leaning against the wall, but her eyes were sharp, clear, awake in a way that was different from earlier. This wasn't the exhaustion of being targeted anymore. It was the energy of resolve taking shape. When her father reappeared, she sat up straighter. "Is it done?" He nodded gently. "He's not going to be bothering anyone else. And when we land, the authorities will take over." She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. He didn't need it either. Instead, he sat down in the open aisle seat next to her, sighing quietly as he adjusted his posture. "You didn't have to fly today," she said after a moment. "You didn't have to come. I wanted to. I told you I'd be fine." "I never doubted that," Calvin replied. "But just because you're strong doesn't mean you have to carry things alone." She looked at him then, a softness returning to her expression. It was always like this with her dad. Conversations that said more between the lines than in them. A fluency between them that made silence feel like dialogue. Passengers were still glancing over, some discreetly, others openly. One woman in row 16 made eye contact with Amara and gave a firm, respectful nod. Amara nodded back. "I think people are starting to figure out who you are," she said. "Let them," Calvin replied simply. It wasn't arrogance. It was assurance. He wasn't hiding. Neither should she. Camille approached again. She looked more composed than earlier, but her voice still carried a thread of apology. "Mr. Duvall, Miss Duvall, just letting you know the captain has radioed ahead. Security and airline officials will be meeting the aircraft at the gate." "Thank you." "Camille," Calvin said. Amara spoke up then. Did you see it happen?" Camille hesitated. "I saw the aftermath. I heard enough to understand what he was trying to do." She looked Amara in the eye. "I'm sorry you had to experience that here, in our cabin, on our plane." "You didn't do it," Amara said. "But you stopped it. That matters." Camille gave a small smile. "You have more grace than most adults I know." When she walked away, Amara let the words linger. Grace. It sounded like something her mother would have said. Her mother had believed deeply in the balance of truth and poise. She once told Amara, "The louder the injustice, the more powerful your calm becomes." She had never fully understood that, not until now. Across the aisle, Harper stood again. She cleared her throat gently and addressed Calvin. "Sir, I don't want to overstep, but I thought you should know I have everything on video. The words, the moment, all of it. If your team needs it, I'll send it wherever you'd like." Calvin looked at her with genuine appreciation. "Thank you. That footage may be more important than you realize." Harper nodded, then turned to Amara. "You okay?" Amara hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Getting there." Harper smiled. "That's enough." She sat back down, her role as witness now transitioning into something more sacred, a keeper of truth. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'll begin our initial descent into Atlanta shortly. Please make sure your seatbacks and tray tables are in the upright position, and all carry-on items are stowed." Amara exhaled. The word descent had never sounded so layered. Her father looked out the window now, the two of them silent as the clouds slowly cleared to reveal the faint outlines of a city below. The lights of Atlanta twinkled like distant stars scattered across a canvas of dusk. Dead, yeah. When people find out, when they hear what happened, what if they say it's just another dramatic teenager overreacting? Then they'll be wrong. What if they say I'm only being taken seriously because of you? He turned toward her. Serious now. Then you tell them who you are. You're Amara Duvall. You've earned your voice. They didn't listen because of me. They listened because of what he did, and because you didn't shrink. Amara swallowed. Her chest felt tight again, but not in fear, in something stronger, something steadier. You can speak, or you can be spoken about, her mother used to say. But silence, too, makes a sound. Make sure it's one you're proud of. She looked down at the Pacific Skies logo stitched across the borrowed sweatshirt. This isn't who I am, she said softly. Then don't let it define you, Calvin replied. Make the next part louder than this part. She didn't know what the next part would be, but she was ready to find out. As the plane dipped slightly, the cabin lights dimmed, passengers buckled up again, checked overhead bins one more time, adjusted jackets and earbuds. Everything was returning to normal, at least on the surface. But for Amara Duvall, nothing would ever be normal again. Not after this, and not after what would come next. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud, followed by the familiar mechanical whine of flaps shifting and brakes engaging. Outside, the skyline of Atlanta blurred past the windows, gray buildings lined against the copper dusk, lights flickering to life as the city exhaled into twilight. Inside the cabin, seatbelts clicked, conversations resumed. The tension had not disappeared, but it had transformed no longer silent discomfort, but the hum of something about to be answered in the back galley. Douglas Whitner sat alone, his eyes darting between the curtain drawn behind him and the cockpit door up front. He had asked for water earlier. No one brought it. Every step of every flight attendant past him now felt like judgment. He checked his phone. No signal yet. The moment Wi-Fi reconnected, he would make a call. To someone, a lawyer, a friend, someone who could tell him how this wasn't fair. Because it wasn't. He told himself he'd been provoked. That girl had challenged him, with her attitude and silence. She had made him feel small, and all he'd done was the thought broke off. He heard Camille's voice through the curtain. Yes, officer, back here. The man in the blue shirt. Whitner straightened. The curtain slid open. Two men in dark TSA windbreakers and black trousers stepped into view, followed by a woman with a tablet in hand. Mr. Whitner, yes, please, come with us. You'll be deplaning separately. Wait, why? This is insane. One of the officers stepped forward. Sir, we've received a report of a physical assault during the flight. We need to take a statement and conduct further questioning. He stood reluctantly. It was coffee. It spilled. That's not assault. You'll have a chance to explain, sir. Let's take it one step at a time. He looked past them, toward the rows of passengers beginning to stand, stretching and opening overhead bins. He saw her, Amara. She was standing now, arms folded, calm, collected. Her sweatshirt still bore the faint ring of coffee around her waist, but her posture held like steel, and next to her, her father. Whitner froze. You're serious. That's who she is. Calvin Duvall said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence was enough. Whitner looked between them, mouth slightly open. His voice came out weaker now. She didn't even get hurt. Calvin raised his eyebrows slightly. The officer's voice cut in. Sir, please. Whitner turned. the wheels of his carry-on thudding dully against the aisle as he followed the officers toward the rear exit. Passengers moved aside, some shaking their heads, others whispering again, "That's the guy good. He deserves it." Harper raised her phone again, capturing the moment. He noticed. "You can't record me," he barked. "Actually," Harper replied coolly, "Georgia is a one-party consent state. Look it up." He opened his mouth again, but the officer gave him a subtle push. Enough. The rear door opened with a mechanical hiss. The officers guided Whitner down the portable stairs where an airport security SUV waited just beyond the tarmac. The blinking lights painted the side of the aircraft in shades of red and blue. The moment swallowed him whole. Back inside, Amara sat back down. She hadn't watched him leave. She didn't need to. Instead, she closed her eyes, breathed in, then out. Camille approached with a small envelope. "Miss Duvall, we've documented everything for your records. You'll receive an official statement via email. And we've already uploaded Ms. Nguyen's footage as well." "Thank you," Amara said softly. She looked up. "You were professional and kind." "I'm not just a flight attendant," Camille said. "I'm a woman, a mother, a sister. I know what it looks like when someone tries to make you smaller." She placed a hand gently on Amara's shoulder. "You didn't let him?" "That matters." The intercom pinged again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Gate B23. Please remain seated until we're parked at the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off." Calvin turned to his daughter. "You ready? I think I have to be," she replied. They waited together as the aircraft slowly rolled into position. Passengers began filing out, row by row, many of them glancing toward Amara. Some gave small nods. A few murmured kind words as they passed. "You handled yourself with grace. You're incredible. Don't let anyone dim your light." A woman in a business suit stopped entirely. "If you ever run for office, I'm voting for you." Amara chuckled softly. "Thank you." Eventually, they stood. Harper waited near the jet bridge to walk out beside them. Outside the plane, a different energy waited. 2 local reporters had somehow caught wind of the incident. Someone on board had leaked a tweet. A blurry photo of Whitner being escorted off was already circulating. By the time Amara stepped into the terminal, the first whispers were happening again, this time not in fear, but in awe. "That's her. That's the girl from the flight." Security met them at the gate, not with suspicion, but with protection. They were ushered through a side corridor, away from cameras. A waiting area had been set aside for Amara and her father to speak with officials, sign statements, and decide next steps. Calvin turned to her. "You don't have to say anything more today, if you don't want to." She nodded. "But I do want to." She took a breath. "I want people to hear what happened from me." A quiet smile spread across his face. "Then we'll make that happen. On your terms." As they disappeared into the corridor, Amara took one last look back toward the gate, where passengers were still trickling out, where the eyes of the world were just beginning to open. And in that moment, something inside her shifted, not broken, not wounded, but rebuilt. This wasn't just a flight anymore. This was the beginning of her voice reaching beyond row 18. The private conference room felt too bright. It was tucked behind security near Terminal B, lined with gray walls, a steel table, and a pitcher of water no one touched. Amara sat at the center, hands folded neatly on the table, shoulders squared. Calvin sat beside her, his presence steady but respectfully quiet. Harper leaned against the back wall, phone resting in her hand, no longer recording, just there still. Two women from the airline's legal team sat opposite them, notepad and tablet in hand. They weren't hostile, but cautious, like people who knew how fast truth could turn into liability. "Miss Duvall," one of them began gently, "we understand this has been a traumatic day. You are under no obligation to speak to press or public figures, but we do need to confirm, are you intending to make a public statement?" Amara nodded once. Clear, unwavering. "Yes, I am." The woman exchanged a glance with her colleague. "Then we'd like to support you. But if I may ask, what exactly do you plan to say?" Amara glanced toward her father. He gave her the smallest nod. She turned back to the woman. "I want to tell the truth. Not just about what happened on the flight, but why it keeps happening, why it keeps being minimized, and why silence isn't protection, it's permission." The room went still. The older woman set her pen down slowly. "I understand. We'll help coordinate the timing. Press is already gathering at the terminal exit." Calvin leaned forward slightly. "Her words won't be edited. No prep. No filters." "Understood," said the other woman. "Within 15 minutes. Amara was escorted to a secure area just beyond the arrival gates, where a podium had been set up hastily in front of a branded airline backdrop. Microphones clustered at the front. Reporters stood in a half moon, pens poised, cameras blinking red. Amara stepped into view, and for the first time, the buzz of voices fell silent without being asked. The girl they had heard about, the one covered in coffee, the daughter of the CEO, the quiet one who never raised her voice, was standing in front of them, not because she wanted to be seen, but because she refused to be invisible. She took a breath. "Good evening. My name is Amara Duvall. I'm 17 years old. I'm a student, a daughter, a citizen. And today, I was a target." The microphones clicked louder. The cameras leaned in. "On Flight 2286 from Seattle to Atlanta, I was seated next to a man who believed he had the right to humiliate me. Not because I provoked him, not because I misbehaved, but because of who I am." She paused, steady, because of my skin, my presence, my refusal to be small. Today, that man poured coffee on me. But that was just the final act. Before that, he poured assumptions, condescension, disgust, and he did it knowing most people wouldn't intervene. The crowd remained silent, but their eyes shouted support. He did it because people like him have learned that harm, when done quietly, is often forgiven. She swallowed. "But we can't keep forgiving silence." Her voice rose slightly, not loud, but with the clarity of a bell. "We have learned to endure, to swallow our discomfort, to say nothing so others can stay comfortable. We are praised for our grace when we are wounded, but we are punished when we call out the wound. Not today, not anymore. I'm not here because I'm the daughter of Calvin Duvall. I'm here because I belong in this world as much as anyone else. Not as an exception, not as a headline, but as a human being who deserves to sit in peace, without being reduced to someone else's punchline." A murmur moved through the reporters. She continued, "I want young people watching this, especially young black girls, to understand something. You do not have to earn your right to be treated with dignity. It is not a reward. It is a birthright." Her voice softened, but her eyes remained locked forward. "And to every person who asked me afterward, 'Are you okay, thank you?' But we must move beyond comforting each other in private. We must be willing to speak loudly when hate shows up in subtle ways." She took a final breath. "This isn't about coffee. This is about consequence, and I intend to see it through." Amara stepped back from the microphone. She didn't look for applause. She didn't wait for praise. She simply walked off the small stage and into her father's arms. Reporters remained frozen for a second, unsure how to respond to what felt more like a sermon than a soundbite. Then the questions came, shouted over one another. "What message do you have for the airline? Will charges be filed? Did you know your father was on the flight?" She didn't answer. She had already said what needed to be said. Later, in the black SUV waiting to take them from the airport, Calvin broke the silence first. "I've sat through 1,000 interviews," he said. "I've hired PR firms, ghostwriters, media coaches, but nothing I've ever said carried the power of what you just did." Amara looked out the window. "I didn't want to sound angry." "You didn't," he replied, "but I was." "Good." She turned to him, surprised. "Good anger isn't the problem," he said. "It's what we do with it that counts." The car moved through the highway, the city stretching out around them, a quilt of lights and motion. Somewhere behind them, Douglas Whitner was still being processed by airport security. Somewhere online, the video Harper had posted had already been picked up by news networks. The world was shifting, and Amara had chosen to meet it head on. "Do you think people will really listen?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he smiled. "They already are." The first 24 hours felt like a tidal wave. Amara's video statement had gone viral before she even reached her hotel room. Clips flooded Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, on TikTok. Audio from her speech had been stitched into thousands of videos, some from activists, some from high schoolers, even one from a young teacher standing in her classroom with tears in her eyes. There were hashtags now. Dignity is not extra. Wanks. Amara spoke. Nimes. Coffee was the spark. She scrolled once, twice, then stopped. The flood of attention felt unreal. People were dissecting her tone, quoting her phrases, calling her brave, bold, righteous. Strangers wrote things like, "This girl speaks like a leader." Others called her the next Stacey Abrams. Her inbox was flooded with podcast invites, interview requests, and influencer collaborations. And yet, beneath the waves of support came the undertow uglier currents. There were comments too, not from allies, from people who said she was overreacting, from people who said she'd made it about race, from people who said she only got attention because of who her father was. She'd expected it, but expectation didn't make it easier. Amara sat on the edge of the hotel bed, legs curled beneath her, phone glowing in her hand. Harper sat nearby, watching her. "You don't have to read them. You know," Harper said gently. "We know who you are. That's all that matters." Amara didn't answer at first. "Then I thought the hardest part was being quiet while it was happening. Turns out, being heard isn't always easier." Harper nodded. "It's louder. That's for sure. Louder and lonelier," Amara whispered. Calvin entered the room quietly, having just stepped out for a call. He paused when he saw the weight on his daughter's face. "I can shut it down," he said. "We can call in the firm, scrub comments, slow the wave." Amara shook her head. "No, I don't want to disappear. I want to be able to breathe in it." He sat beside her. "Not as a CEO, as a father. Truth makes people uncomfortable," he said, "especially when it doesn't ask for permission." Amara looked at him. "Why do people hate being asked to look at what they don't want to see? Because it makes them question everything they thought was harmless." She rested her head briefly on his shoulder. The three of them sat there, Amara, Calvin, and Harper. No one speaking, but everyone hearing the same thing. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something that came with weight. Later that night, an email came through from the airline's communications department. They wanted Amara to approve an official statement, one she didn't write. She opened the document. It read, "We deeply regret the unfortunate incident aboard Flight 2286 involving a passenger and Miss Amara Duvall. We condemn all forms of discrimination and are working to ensure passenger safety. Unfortunate incident. Miss..." It was sanitized, erased. She closed the email without replying. She wasn't a miss. She was a person. It wasn't an incident. It was violence intentional, even if it didn't leave bruises. She wasn't going to approve something that made it easier for people to look away. The next morning, Calvin was up early, coffee in hand, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, something Amara hadn't seen in months. "Walk with me," he asked. She nodded. They walked through downtown Atlanta, streets still wet with dawn. They passed joggers, early commuters, coffee carts. Nobody stopped them. No one even recognized them. It was a strange, welcome anonymity. "I was your age when I first saw someone spit at my mother," Calvin said. "I thought I'd seen enough of that to be numb by now. But seeing it done to you, it did something to me." Amara stayed quiet. She used to tell me that when people show you who they are, don't just look, listen. "And what did you hear?" she asked. He exhaled. "I heard fear. From him. From the people defending him. They're scared of losing control of the narrative. They're scared of you because you didn't shout. You didn't fight. You made it impossible for them to blame your reaction." "Do you think I did it right?" Amara asked. "There is no right," he said. "Only real." They walked a little farther, then sat on a bench facing the city skyline. "Do you regret letting me speak?" she asked. He turned to her. "No. I regret not teaching you sooner that your voice didn't need my permission." She smiled faintly. "People want me to write an op-ed," she said, "or go on TV. You don't owe anyone anything." He replied, "I know, but I think I want to." He nodded slowly. "Then do it, but on your terms, and take your time." Later that day, she received a message from her debate coach at school, a voice memo. "I saw what you did, and I want you to know your delivery, your tone, your clarity. It was masterful. But what mattered most was that it wasn't performance. It was truth. Thank you for using what we practiced for something so real." Amara played it twice. She hadn't felt brave that day. She just felt tired of shrinking. But if bravery looked like standing while shaking, then maybe she had been brave after all. That night, she sat on the hotel balcony, laptop open. She didn't have a title for the essay yet, but the first line came easily. "My silence made him comfortable. My voice made him visible." She paused, then typed another. "I didn't speak to be a symbol. I spoke because I was human." And someone tried to forget that. She kept writing, and for the first time in days, her hands didn't shake. By the end of the week, the conversation had grown far beyond Amara's name. It wasn't just about a flight anymore. It wasn't just about a cup of coffee. It had become something larger, something systemic, something uncomfortable, and something necessary. Across the country, high schools were holding assemblies. In one small town in Ohio, a black student council president stood at a podium and read Amara's statement aloud to a room that had never heard the words racial microaggressions spoken from a stage. In Chicago, a professor at Northwestern played Amara's speech on a screen before beginning a seminar titled Power, Perception, and the price of presence. In San Diego, a fourth-grade teacher asked her class, "Have you ever seen someone be treated unfairly because of how they looked?" The children raised their hands, slowly at first, then more hands followed, then the stories. It wasn't just education. It was the slow bending of the collective mirror toward truth. Amara didn't ask for that. She didn't intend to be a symbol. But people had seen something in her they could hold on to, something that wasn't filtered or polished. Just real. She noticed it most in the letters. They began arriving 3 days after her statement, some by email, some handwritten. One came from a 62-year-old grandmother in Texas. "I cried watching you speak. You reminded me of the girl I used to be, before I learned to hold my tongue to stay safe." Another from a flight attendant in New York. "Thank you for not shrinking. For every moment I wanted to speak up and didn't. You gave me back a little piece of courage." And one more, from a boy in South Carolina. "I'm 13. I didn't think anyone listened to people who look like me. Now I want to learn how to speak like you." Amara read them all, sometimes twice. She printed some and taped them to the hotel mirror. They didn't erase the hate mail. They didn't drown out the vitriol from strangers demanding she move on or stop playing the victim. But they mattered more, because they came from people who weren't trying to be right. They were trying to be honest. At breakfast one morning, Calvin slid his phone across the table. "You've been requested." Amara looked at the screen. It was a message from a national civil rights organization. They were hosting a panel on digital activism and wanted her to join. Not as a guest, as a featured speaker. She stared at the message for a long time. "I'm not an activist," she said quietly. "You're someone who told the truth," Calvin replied. "Sometimes that's enough to begin. I'm still figuring out what I want." "That's okay. You're allowed to." Later that day, Harper and Amara went for a walk in Piedmont Park. The air was cool, the sun gentle, filtered through high trees. The noise of the week dulled slightly beneath the leaves. "I had a professor once who said nothing changes overnight," Harper said. "But the night before, change feels different, like something's holding its breath." Amara glanced at her. "Is that what this feels like?" Harper shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe this is the breath before something breaks open." They walked in silence for a bit, passing joggers, kids chasing soccer balls, a street musician playing slow jazz on a trumpet. Amara sat on a bench, pulling her knees up to her chest. "I'm scared I said the only thing I had in me," she admitted. "Like, what if I can't keep showing up with that same voice? What if it was a one-time spark and I burn out?" After this, Harper sat beside her. "Then rest. Regroup. Sparks don't have to be fires to make a mark. You already lit something." Amara breathed out slowly. "I don't want to be known for just what happened to me." "Then keep living," Harper replied. "That'll be your answer." That night, Amara checked the press feed again. There was a new development. Douglas Whitner had released a public apology. It was brief, carefully written, cleared by legal teams. He stated he was deeply regretful for his behavior. He said his actions did not reflect his values. He said he respected Miss Duvall's courage and that he had learned from the experience. It ended with a promise to engage in educational conversations around unconscious bias. Amara stared at the screen, then shut the laptop. She wasn't angry. She wasn't moved either. It didn't feel like healing. It felt like paperwork. And she was tired of paperwork pretending to be change. The next morning, she drafted a letter of her own, not to Whitner, to the Pacific Skies Board of Directors. In it, she made no demands. She made an offer. I am willing to work with your diversity and training division to help shape a program that's informed by lived experience. Not just corporate language, but only if you're willing to center the voices of those who've lived it. She signed it simply Amara Duvall, passenger. Student, witness. 3 days later, the head of the board responded. They accepted. Not just her input, her presence. They invited her to help shape a program that could be used across all partner airlines. She didn't feel victorious. She felt ready. It was just the beginning. The airport felt different now. Not smaller, not bigger, just clearer. Amara walked through the main terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson, a rolling carry-on by her side, sweatshirt sleeves pulled down over her wrists. Her hair was tied back in a soft bun. No makeup, no press, just her. It had been 3 weeks. 3 weeks since Flight 2286. 3 weeks since the speech, the press storm, the backlash, the quiet applause in parking lots, and the occasional stranger who looked at her just a little longer than usual. Her name had stopped trending. And in a strange way, that felt like freedom. Today's flight wasn't public. There were no reporters, no cameras, no podiums. It was just her and a round-trip ticket to New York City for a student-led policy conference. She wasn't speaking, not this time. She was attending, sitting in the back, listening, learning, letting her voice rest without losing its strength. Calvin had offered to fly with her, but she declined. I need to do this one by myself, she had said. He didn't argue. At security, she placed her shoes in the bin, her laptop in the tray. No one blinked. No one stopped her. At the gate, she pulled out a paperback novel and started reading. Something fiction, something unrelated to anything she'd lived. Gate B-19 began pre-boarding. She stood, not with fear, with decision. As she walked down the jet bridge, the familiar scent of recycled air and jet fuel filled her lungs. It was the same kind of plane, the same configuration, but she was different now. She stepped into the cabin and made her way to her seat, 20A by the window. No one was in 20B yet. She placed her bag beneath the seat, adjusted the vent overhead, and exhaled. A flight attendant approached. "Hi there. I just wanted to say thank you." Amara looked up. "I was on 2286, the woman said, lowering her voice. "I didn't speak up then. I should have. But I've carried that guilt every day since. I watched how you handled it, with more strength than I think I'd have had at your age. I've changed how I do this job because of you." Amara offered a small smile. "Thank you for telling me." The woman nodded once and moved on. The seat beside her filled just before takeoff. A middle-aged man, white shirt, Bluetooth earpiece tucked behind his collar. He smiled politely as he sat, and that was it. No questions, no assumptions, no tension. She buckled her seatbelt, glanced once at the safety card, and leaned back as the plane began to taxi. Out the window, the sun cast gold over the runway. As they ascended, the city tilted and shrank below. She didn't look down long. She focused on the clouds ahead, white and soft like the kind she used to trace with her fingers on long drives as a child. Somewhere around cruising altitude, she pulled out her journal. No laptops, no screens, just pen and paper. She wrote slowly. Not about the man, not about the coffee, not about the speech. She wrote about stillness, about what it meant to be seen for something beyond survival, about how healing doesn't happen in grand declarations, but in quiet decisions to keep going. She wrote about a girl who once sat by a window and felt small, and how she wasn't that girl anymore, not because of what the world saw, but because of what she saw in herself. A flight attendant came by with snacks. "Would you like pretzels or cookies?" Amara smiled. "Cookies, please. And water." "Yes, thank you." She took the cookie and stared at the tiny pack, noticing how something so ordinary could feel like a luxury after being denied peace once before. She didn't eat it right away. She just held it. Later. As the seatbelt sign came back on and the captain announced their descent into LaGuardia, Amara closed her journal and looked out the window again. A little boy a few rows ahead was bouncing with excitement. First flight. The mother nodded. His first plane ever. Amara leaned forward just enough to catch the boy's eye. "You're going to love the landing," she said. He grinned. The wheels touched down with a softer thud than usual, and the cabin filled with the quiet rustle of seatbelts and stretching limbs. As passengers gathered their things, the man beside her turned and spoke. "You're Amara Duvall." "Right." She didn't flinch. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Thank you. My daughter's your age. She watched your speech with me," she said. "I want to be that clear when I talk about what matters." Amara blinked. "Tell her clarity comes from practice and courage." "I will." They filed out of the plane slowly, sun filtering through the jet bridge windows. In the terminal, Amara walked toward the baggage claim, alone, strong, quiet. A woman approached, no phone in hand, no press badge. She simply said, "I don't want to interrupt. Just, I heard what you said, and I see you." Amara smiled. "I see you too." She exited the terminal. The air outside was crisp, a little colder than Atlanta, but clean. The wind tousled her hair slightly. She hailed a cab. As it pulled up, she looked back once at the airport behind her. 3 weeks ago, a flight had almost broken something in her. Today, a flight had brought her back to herself, not because everything had healed, but because she had chosen to move forward anyway. The gate had reopened, and she had walked through it on her own terms. She never asked to be a symbol. She just wanted to land in peace. But when someone tried to reduce her to a seat number, to a stereotype, to a target, she stood up, not with anger, not with violence, but with presence, with clarity, with truth. Amara Duvall didn't just reclaim her voice. She reminded us all that dignity is not extra, it is owed. And while one man's cruelty tried to make her small, the world saw something larger, a girl who chose courage over comfort and truth over silence. This story is a mirror. It asks, when we witness injustice, do we speak or stay seated when someone's humanity is denied? Do we whisper our discomfort or do we demand better? Racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it pours quietly, like coffee over a sweatshirt. But in that moment, Amara taught us, even silent hate makes a sound, and it's time we stop pretending we don't hear it. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Like, share, and subscribe to stay connected. There are more stories like this, more voices rising, and the next one might change everything. Stay with us. The next flight is boarding soon.